Today we're going to continue on in this series in the Old Testament that we're looking at the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And it's a really weird book. If you've been here through this series so far, you already know this. I'm not giving you new news. If you're here with us for the first time, then you're gonna be in for a little treat this morning, a strange, depressing, sort of sad treat. Just kidding. But the book of Ecclesiastes, if you were to ask me about it and say, well, what is it? This is what I'd say. I'd say that Ecclesiastes is true wisdom, like real wisdom. And I say that as it relates to other things that we call wisdom. So even in the Bible, there are things that traditionally people that study the Bible, they call them wisdom literature. Things like the book of Proverbs, people call that the wisdom literature. And I'm not saying no one should read Proverbs. I think it's really good. I'm not advocating it for it to be taken out of the Bible. I just think that Proverbs is very different from Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is real wisdom, where I think what Proverbs is, those kinds of teaching, that's actually just good advice. Right? A lot of Proverbs is just common sense sort of stuff. And there's a difference between common sense and wisdom. Truly, there's a difference between those two, right? Because wisdom has a sense of being grounded. Wisdom has a sense of being rooted, right? When somebody's wise, it's like circumstances can be swirling and the situation can be incredibly complex. But that person who's wise, they have this ability to speak into things, and it's like they know something about what's going on in the universe that nobody else does. That's wisdom, right? And then common sense is that other stuff. We've all had experiences like this where you're going through a particular complicated thing, you're navigating something that's difficult, and somebody calls you or somebody meets with you and they give you common sense like it's wisdom. And there's something about someone giving you common sense in a complicated scenario that we don't really love. Have you ever noticed that? It's like, oh yeah, really, thank you very much for that, you know? Like it makes sense, but it doesn't help. It's just like a platitude. And so when they leave or when you hang up the phone, and by the way, certain people of a certain age, when we hang up the phone, apparently we do this. Some of you are like, hang up the phone? Why is that hang up the phone? Hang up the phone? I don't know. But anyways, I'm just revealing my age. But anyways, when you hang up the phone, you're just like, I don't know that I appreciated that, right? And then there's those people that just possess wisdom. And it's like they come into that same situation and they see something and it's like, oh my goodness, just like the heavens open up and you understand things. And there's this capacity that they have. They're grounded, they're rooted. And I mention that to say this, that as we dive into Ecclesiastes, what we're hoping for, as we study it and as we ingest it, as we interact with it, what we're desiring is that we would move from just simply being smart people, because we're all incredibly brilliant people in this room, but that we would move from being just smart to being wise. Because at the end of our days, all of us would rather hear somebody say, that was a really wise person. Saying you're smart, well, that's great. You had some good common sense, but wisdom is that deeper thing. And so as we move further into this book, what we're hoping for is that all of us in the room, that we possess that kind of third dimension of wisdom that Ecclesiastes is giving us. Are you with me on this? So this morning, we're going to dive into chapter 7. And chapter 7, this is week number 6. We're in chapter 7. A couple more weeks, we're going to be looking at this book. But let me just say right up front that in chapter 7, there's a few verses that actually are historically my favorite verses in Ecclesiastes. In fact, there's some of my favorite verses in the Bible. And some of you, when you hear them, you're going to think Brad is one sick, sadistic individual if you didn't already think this because I'm teaching Ecclesiastes. There is something about what we're going to read today that I think is incredibly powerful. Before we do that, before we get into the text, I want to just give a little pop quiz. Like in honor of school coming to an end and summer almost being here, one more pop quiz, right? Just to make people sweat. This is actually a really easy one. In fact, in just a second, I'm going to show a picture. And the picture of the person that I'm going to show you, I'm going to want you to guess who they are. Some of you might know who it is. I want to see if you know who it is. I'm just hoping that being the outdoors-oriented community that we are, that someone in the room will recognize this person. But I just want you to look. If you know who it is, yell his name out. So far in the services, I've not heard one person get it right, so I'm not very encouraged at this point. So please, somebody, know who this guy is. Anyone know who this is? Blank, isn't it? Yes. So this guy's name is Aron Ralston. Anyone heard of Aron Ralston before? I get to tell a lot of people about Aron Ralston today. Okay, so here it is. So here's Aron Ralston. In April 2003, Aron Ralston, who was an engineer by trade, but his hobby was mountain climbing, rock climbing, and canyoneering. Aron Ralston went canyoneering in Canyonlands National Park. And while he's descending one of the lower stretches of the slot canyon that he was in, there was a boulder that was wedged. And as he went past it, got to the ground, the boulder fell and it pinned his arm between the wall of the canyon and the rock. And so literally he's stuck in this position. He actually took a picture of himself in this spot. You can just see this here. This was him in the spot, arms stuck with this boulder, and he's pinned there. Now, immediately he realizes, the only way that I'm going to get out of this situation is if somebody finds me and helps me. And so he realizes the only way someone's going to find me is if I live long enough for them to do that. So he starts rationing his water and his food, which at that point, he says that at that point of the whole thing, he had 12 ounces of water left in his Camelback, and he had a burrito. I don't know that I want a burrito to be my last meal. I love burritos. From now on, when I'm doing an adventure, I might pack more than a burrito. But anyway, so he starts rationing a little bit of water out of his Camelback and then a little bite of burrito. And he's just rationing, kind of waiting day after day. Sun comes up, sun comes down, sun comes up, sun comes down. By the way, one of his big mistakes, he didn't tell anybody where he was going or what he was doing. So right there, your chances of being found are very minimal, right? Somebody has to stumble upon you at the bottom of a canyon in order for you to live. So deep into this, like 3-4 days into this, he makes this realization. He realizes the only way that I'm going to get out of this is if I cut my arm off. So he gets his multi-tool out. The problem is this. Instead of having like a nice Gerber or Leatherman multi-tool, he has like that free one that comes with a flashlight set that you get from Costco. And it's like whatever, he's like, pulls the thing out and he pulls the saw open. He's like, that is not going to saw through the bones in my arm. And so he just sort of gives up. And he makes a video and says goodbye to his family. I called it a film in one of the services today, by the way. He made a film. That's another sign of my age. Film and phones. But he makes a video and he shoots this thing, says goodbye to everybody, and then just like goes to sleep wondering if he's going to wake up in the morning. He has this crazy dream. He talks about it in his book. And he wakes up the next day and his arms kind of go numb to this certain level. And he suddenly has this genius moment. As an engineer, he realizes I can put enough leverage between me and this rock that I can snap the bones in my arm. Then I can cut through my arm and get myself out of here. Right? By 11 o'clock, I'm hoping breakfast is settled for you, okay? So he takes the Camelback hose off his Camelback. He makes a tourniquet. That's important. Do that first before ever cutting off your arm, right? Note to self. So he wraps the Camelback thing, right? He makes a tourniquet, gets out his little, Walmart, Costco multi-tool thing, and he starts sawing through his arm, cuts through the tendon, snips all the major arteries, pulls this thing together and gets his arm out. The problem is this. He has an 8-mile hike out of the space that he's in, and he has to rappel down another 60 feet to get out of his predicament. So one-handed, by the way, he lost 40 pounds in this amount of time. Talk about a weird weight loss plan. I think 5 of it was his hand, I think. But that's a whole other deal, right? It was 2003. It's not too soon, okay? I think he's okay with it. But So he gets this thing, rappels down. He's hiking at mile number 6. There's this Norwegian family on vacation, on holiday in the States. And I just picture this. He stumbles on them. And can you imagine this one-armed guy, blood spewing, coming out of the canyon, kids, hide your eyes, right? So they call rescuers. They immediately send a helicopter, and the guy lives. And I share this story. I open up with this because I think it highlights a couple of important lessons. Number one is this. If you're going canyoneering, tell somebody where you're going, right? That's common sense. When I talked about common sense and good advice, that's good advice, right? But then there's a second, deeper thing that I want us to just think about for a second, and that's this. When you hear this story, you realize there is nothing more powerful than the human will to live. Am I right? There is something inside of us. All of us right now, we're I wouldn't cut off my arm. Guess what? You might. You might, because there's this thing that rises up inside of us when death is on the line, when we will literally do things we never thought we would do. There's something, we love life, we love living, we love it enough to go through great lengths to keep living. I knew a guy several years ago, he was hunting in the woods, and he had a camping trailer, and the trailer fell and broke both of his femurs. He got the trailer off of himself after a day and then crawled through the woods 2 miles to a dirt road where he then waited, hoping that somebody would drive by and find him laying on the side of the road. What are you doing? No, just chilling. Just hanging out here. Drag myself through the woods, 2 broken legs. We will do this stuff, right? Think about this. We will take organs from another person's body and we will put them in our own to stay living. Talk about extreme lengths. Isn't that weird when you think about it? Think about this. Chemotherapy. You have something in your body that's killing you, so you take something else that might kill you to try to kill the thing that's killing you. You poison yourself with chemicals, hoping that it will kill that thing before that thing kills you. Why do we do this? Because we have this will to live. On a smaller scale, let's reduce the intensity for a moment. We eat things that don't taste good, and we could just be eating butter and bacon all day long, right? Why? Because we know I like to keep on living, so I can't just eat butter and bacon, right? Those are two amazing things, God's gifts, but I'm not going to live very long if that's all that I do. So we have this deep understanding. And then layered on top of that, along with this drive to live, we have this drive to avoid suffering that leads to death, right? We don't like suffering. In fact, given the choice, all of us in the room, hey, do you want to have joy or do you want to have suffering? Unanimously, we all go, I think joy sounds good, right? We don't need scientific research or a survey to prove that people like joy. We choose to avoid suffering. So here's how we're wired as people. We will do everything we can to keep living and mitigate opportunities for suffering. Not only for ourselves, we do it for others. As a husband and as a father, when I look at my relationship with my wife and my children, one of the things that I've always wanted to do is I don't want them to suffer. And I certainly want to make sure I protect their life, right? And so we have this natural knee-jerk response to suffering and the loss of life that says, I'm going to lean away from those things. So pain, we don't like pain. And by the way, pain comes in all kinds of different forms. It's not just physical, right? There is like existential pain that we experience. There's the pain of loneliness that we encounter, right? It's a different kind of pain, but there's a pain of loneliness. There's a pain of a meaninglessness. There's a pain that comes when you lack purpose or you lack significance. There's a pain that comes from things like boredom. Boredom is a kind of pain. It's like this dull pain that we feel, which when we feel those kinds of pains, whether it's those things or physical, we do everything we can to make it go away. So soapbox moment for just a second. I'll get off of it for a second. But this is why social media is so addictive for us. Right? Because the moment that I feel insignificant, the moment that I feel lonely, the moment that I'm bored, what can I do? Well, I can open my phone and I can open up Instagram, and in an instant, it's like ibuprofen that dulls the pain of what's going on deeper inside of me. And suddenly I don't have to think about being lonely because there's people. I don't have to think about being bored because now I'm looking at what other people are doing because they're not bored. Now I don't have to think about being insignificant because if I post something that makes me look significant, other people think I'm significant even though I'm not, right? So there's this addictive nature to it because immediately we can resolve those kinds of feelings. Now, again, I'll stop with that before somebody throws a tomato at me. But the point is that as soon as we feel things, that's why most of us, you're like sitting in the car for like a second. You're like waiting somewhere. And you're just like, oh, I'll hold my phone, look at Instagram. Oh, look at Facebook real quick. Why? Because as soon as you start to feel those things, you go there, right? So we want to alleviate suffering. We want to alleviate pain. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing this, and the reason I'm taking the time to state the obvious the way that I am, is that the passage in Ecclesiastes that we're about to get into has a jarring wisdom for all of us who enjoy life and avoid pain. For all of us who lean away from uncomfortable situations, all of us that don't want pain and suffering, what the writer of Ecclesiastes is going to say today is going to be very challenging for us to actually listen to, and yet I really think it's beautiful and valuable for us. So chapter 7, verse 1, I'm just going to read 5 verses of this. It says this: a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Frustration is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, and the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. It's better to heed the rebuke of a wise person than to listen to the song of fools. And on he goes. And all of these things he's saying, they're the opposite of our natural inclination. He's asking us to lean in when we want to lean out. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what he's doing. And first, what I want to just highlight is how he starts this, because I think it's beautiful and brilliant. I think it's worth us actually seeing. I love that he starts by getting us to nod in agreement. The first line, he gives us this little bridge that sounds like common sense. It sounds like good advice, but he's actually leading us into something deeper. He starts with this statement that a good name is better than fine perfume. And that sounds very proverbial, right? It sounds like something straight from the Proverbs. And he's saying a good name is, and we kind of hear that, a good name is better than fine perfume. And you kind of nod your head and go, yeah, that's right? Because what's he saying? Well, what he's saying is that it's better to be good than to smell good. Which like 99% of the time, that's true. There is like 1% where you meet one person. You're like, you could be a little worse and smell a little better. But most of the time, this is true, right? In other words, what he's saying is it's better that you have integrity, which is earned, than to have a good impression, which can be bought or paid for, right? You can make a good impression on the outside, but is it real? Your name, your integrity, that's what's real. That's what really matters. And by the way, all of us, we hear this. That resonates, doesn't it? There's a part of you that goes, yeah, you know what? You're right. Integrity is more important than looking good. And we start nodding our heads, which is brilliant because if you're into persuading people, you already know this. You know that the best way to persuade somebody is not arguing with them, but it's getting them to agree with you first, right? So he gets us to agree with him. We go, okay, yeah, you're right. This sounds like a really good piece of wisdom. I'm going to take this in. He gains credibility. But what is he really doing here? What he's actually getting us to agree with is a deeper, larger thing that we need to wrestle with. Because it sets the stage for everything else that he's saying. Because if we agree with this, then the rest of this stuff might make more sense. See, he's getting us to agree with this idea that intangible things are more important or more valuable than tangible things, isn't he? When we say that, we're already nodding our head and we're going, wait, yeah, you're right. There are intangibles, things like integrity. You can't put your finger on it. You just know when someone has it. And he's saying stuff that's intangible is more valuable than that's tangible. And all of us go, yeah, you're right. Like deep down, there's something that resonates. That's real truth. That's real truth. Intangible qualities. So he gets us nodding our heads. And then all of a sudden, he goes, okay, with that understanding that the intangible is important, he says the day of death is better than the day of birth. And it's better to go to a house of mourning than it is to go to a house of feasting. And you can almost hear the record player scratch, right? It's like, wait, what? Are you sure? Like, what are you talking about? Because we prefer life. We are hardwired to survive. This is not something we learn. This is neurology. This is biology. This is part of who we are. 95% of us, it is like thirst. It is like hunger. We simply, fundamentally, we prefer life. So why would we want to prefer death? Why would you even present that to us as an option? Why would we want to be in a house of mourning? Why would that even be something we'd be interested in? Why would we lean into this? And so you start to wonder to yourself, like, who is this writer of Ecclesiastes and what is wrong with him, right? And before you get too judgmental, let me just warn you, because he's not the only person that says this. Fast forward to the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 5. There's this sermon that's called the Sermon on the Mount. And the person preaching that sermon is Jesus himself. And in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, you hear Jesus say these words. He says, blessed are those who what? Mourn, for they'll be comforted. So you start wondering, well, why? What is it with this mourning? What is it with this leaning into death and its reality? What is this all about? What is the teacher of Ecclesiastes and the teacher Jesus, what are they trying to show us? And why would they want us to lean in a way that we're not naturally given to lean? Could there be a wisdom that's buried beneath this? Could there be some sort of wisdom gem that we're being delivered here that actually seems to defy our common response, but actually lead us to something more? So he goes on, verse 2, death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Lean into death, because this is the destiny of everyone. And you that are living, which is, last time I checked, everyone in this room, you should let this sink into your heart. All right, remember I said we don't like pain and suffering and we don't like talking about death. Agreed? Anyone want to come up for air for just a minute? Okay. How many of you have been to the beach in the last 3 years? Let's change the subject. Yeah. How many of you want to talk about the beach right now? Yeah, a lot of us. Like, yeah, anything but death, right? So you've been to the beach. How many have been to the beach? Anyone never been to the beach in their life? Never mind. We don't want to know because we'll be sad for you and we don't like sad things. So you've been to the beach. Everyone's been to the beach. And if you haven't been, just come talk to me after the service. We'll make sure you get there. So have you ever noticed this? You go to the beach and there's this immediate thing that happens inside of human beings where once we're there and we've kind of unwound a little bit, we start playing with the sand. Have you ever noticed this? Like sand must be played with. And so like when my kids were little, they would go down and they would have their buckets and shovels and they would build the castle and do the whole thing. And as a big kid or a little kid in a big body, I would go join my kids, and I was always like kind of building castles and messing with it and doing the thing. And I would like play all day long with my kids there. In fact, there were times when like they wanted to go do other stuff and I'm like, you're not leaving till we're done, that kind of thing. But we all want to like build the sand castle and do this stuff. And if it's not that, we do other things. Like go on Instagram if you want to, and you can see this. Like every time someone goes to a beach, they decide to write something in the sand, like, so-and-so loves so-and-so, and the big heart and the arrow. We do this, like we create things in the sand, and people form things and they dig things. And for some reason, some people bury each other in the sand. We don't know why we do this. But there's something about the sand that we just create stuff. Have you noticed that? You just kind of play with it. You create stuff in the sand. Came across this picture this week. I wish I could claim this one. There's this sand castle. And all of my kids' life, that's all I wanted to do. Just, let's build that, And there's times like we work, and I take like a step back. I look at what we did. I'm like, oh, somebody just knock it down. It's never going to be that. So we have this tendency. We're all drawn to build and create and do things in the sand, right? We all do this. But notice what's happening to this castle in this picture. What's going on here? And the erosion's happening because the tide is coming in, right? The tide is coming in. We all create in the sand, but eventually everything you and I create in the sand, it gets washed away, right? So those of you that raised your hand, you said you've been to the beach in the last 3 years. You're not going to show up like next week and expect whatever you did to still be there, are you? You don't show up like, where's my sandcastle? Somebody moved it. It's a crime. No, you knew when you walked away that tomorrow, after the tide came in and came out, that you would not have your sandcastle, right? In this life, everything we create, everything we make, everything we experience, from birth until death, is done on the shores of an immense ocean called eternity. Not infinity, but eternity. This thing the writer of Ecclesiastes talks about. We build our lives in the sand on the shore of an immense ocean. And one day, the tide is going to rise, and it will take all of the sand of all of the things that we have formed and we have shaped, and it will sweep them back out again, and there will be very little, if no sign, that we were ever there. All the efforts, the company we worked for, the business that we started, the relationships we nurtured, the house that we built and decorated, the money that we saved, eventually the tide comes in and the tide goes out, and somebody will wander along and go, there's signs that somebody was here one time. It all gets washed away. Now take a deep breath. Because I know some of you right now, you're panicking. You're like, I don't want to talk about this. You're like, I hate this church. I came here to get rid of my anxiety, and he's just giving me more, right? Which is actually why we need to continue. Because what I really think the writer is doing is he's actually trying to eliminate some of the deeper anxiety that we feel. I think he's actually trying to change this thing inside of us. And he's telling us this whole time, what he's telling us about leaning into mourning, going to this house of where death is known, he's saying the nature of life is like this. Life is lived in the sand. And that takes us back to a word that is central to the whole book of Ecclesiastes. And we unpacked it during the first week. And today I want to go back to that word, and I want to talk about it on another level, another dimension of what this word means. Because now that we're deeper in the book, it has another meaning that I want to expose for us. But it's the Hebrew word havel. And the Hebrew word havel, if you were here in our first week, it means vapor or passing in the Hebrew language. Now, unfortunately, when you open up an English Bible, an English translation, 90% of the time, what you see, instead of the word vapor, instead of seeing the word passing, the English translators, they made the decision to take the Hebrew word havel and they translated it meaningless. They took some liberties with this word. But the word havel actually means vapor. It actually means passing, and it does not mean meaningless. In fact, the reason that it's translated meaningless, as a side note for a moment, the reason it's translated meaningless is actually the misperception of the translators, and they're being influenced by the philosophies of the world that we live in today. In fact, it is the philosophy of materialism that causes them to think and then translate this way. When I say materialism, by the way, I'm not talking about being materialistic. In our culture, being materialistic is just an outcome of a philosophy called materialism that really grew in strength after the Enlightenment. When us as individuals, we began to see things scientifically, we began to observe the world that we live in, we began to understand matter, and there was a fundamental shift in the way that human beings lived in the world, and rather than thinking about the unseen or the unknown, we began to reverse and now think all about the seen and the known. And the only thing that matters in materialism is matter. Total pun intended, right? The only thing that matters is matter. The only thing that matters is stuff that lasts. And stuff that doesn't last doesn't matter. That's the conclusion. And so you fast forward a couple hundred years, and English translators are translating, and they hear a word like vapor and passing, and they're saying, well, this isn't material. And so if it's not material, then it can't have meaning. But let me just tell you this. There's a difference between meaningless and temporary, isn't there? Just because something is temporary doesn't mean that it's meaningless. Vapor, passing, means temporary. It does not mean meaningless. In fact, when you and I wake up to moments when we realize the temporary nature of something, certain things, that realization actually breathes life into that moment or that thing, doesn't it? And for example, I have 3 daughters. One of them's 20. One of them turns 17 this fall. One of them just turned 19. So I don't know why I did them out of order, but that's just how my brain works. So, but that's my girls. And let me just tell you this. When my girls were given to me, when they handed them to me in the hospital, and I'm holding them, there was this realization. You know what? Someday they're going to turn 17, 19, 21. They're going to hit these ages, and my ability to influence them, it's going to end. And so right there in the hospital, as I was holding them, I just decided then, I'm giving up. Right? I was going to roll the dice. This baby's temporary, right? Come on, you're not going to be here that long. Why does it really matter? No, right? So because there was temper, because there was a window and I knew the time was short, what does that mean? Well, that means that bump on the knee and that learning how to ride the bike and that conflict with a teacher and that problem with a friend and the questions that arose in their life, the difficulties, the celebrations, it means that all of those things, they were given a little bit more life, right? They were given a little more intensity. There was something breathed into those that then gave them more meaning. And so now, even as though days draw closer and closer, there's more meaning about the time that I have with them. Are you with me in this? Just because something is temporary doesn't mean it's meaningless. So let's play a little game for a second. Let me just show you a number. Here's a number for you. $25,550. If I came in today and I said, I'm going to give everyone in the room $25,550, you would not turn me down, would you? Because that's a decent amount of money. $25,550. You could buy an okay car with that, right? Buy a decent car with $25,000. A few years ago, that could have been a down payment on a house. Actually, enough years ago, you didn't need a down payment on a house, right? You could just zero down, right? But $25,550. That's like a week of a freshman year of college. That's what that covers. At least that's what it feels like to me, right? $25,000. But 25 grand is enough money you go, okay, that's decent. That's a decent amount of money. You wouldn't turn it down. But if I came to you and I said, I got an idea for a game show. Every week, there's going to be contestants, and we're going to give away $25,000. Nobody's going to watch my game show, are they? Because nobody says, do you want to be a 25,000-aire? No one ever says that, right? It's, do you want to be a millionaire, right? $25,000, you're like, it doesn't seem like that much, right? Well, then it's like, is it really that much? Let me change your perspective another way. And actually, this is a good thing to think about your money. I'll just help you think about your money differently for a moment. What if this? What if I came to you and I said, $25,550, that's the amount of money you are going to get one time in your life, and you will never get $1 more. Some of you, your wheels start spinning, right? Some of you business entrepreneurial people, you're like, well, we got to figure out a way to make money with money, right? Some of you are like, I don't think I'm going to buy a Slurpee. I don't know. Maybe hold off on that. Some of you are going to buy a Slurpee, and you shouldn't, okay? Just let me help you with this. If that's all you're going to get, it changes your perspective, right? So 25,550, let me just tell you this. 25,550 is not a number around money. That is the number of days that a person who is born in the West gets when they're born. And that's how many they have on average until they die. That is the average life expectancy of a human being born in the West, 25,550. That is all that you've been given. It doesn't sound like very much, does it? In fact, here's the scary thing. I ran the numbers this week. If I'm average, which everything else in my life tells me I am, if I'm average, I have 9,125 days left. Some of you in the room should not do the math, at least not right now. Some of you are running in a deficit, just so you know, and you know who you are. But all laughing aside, all kidding aside, when you realize this, when you recognize this, this leaves us with a question that I want us to take to heart. Can we afford to waste a single day not enchanted with the gift of life that we've been given? Man, if I got 9,000 of them left, am I going to wake up and waste any of them being distracted by stupid stuff, worrying about things that don't matter? Am I going to spend my days fretting about stuff I'll later regret? Like, what do you worry about? What do you stress about? What's the stuff that just spins you out? And you, like, right now in this moment, you're like, oh my goodness, that actually doesn't really matter at all, does it? A couple weeks ago, my youngest daughter, she had like a little fender bender. In fact, I was out of town, so I'd expected to like come home and the bumper was off of our car. And I got home and there literally not even a scratch. Not a scratch. Not a dent. I know she didn't fix it while I was gone. Not a scratch, not a ding, not a dent, nothing. Not a blemish on our car. She hits this guy in a truck. The guy jumps out of his truck on 57th. He jumps out of his truck. My 16-year-old daughter, by the way, just getting out of a boot from a broken ankle, standing there with her boot on. And this guy gets out and starts berating her, screaming obscenities at her. She bursts into tears. Somebody rescues her, puts her in his car. Very grateful for that person. My other daughter shows up. He does the same thing with her, screaming at her, losing his mind. When my dad showed up, my daughter said to my dad, I've never been spoken to that way in my life. And then she said, I didn't know people like that existed. I found out who the guy is. And I know where he lives. I have his address. That's a whole other sermon for another day. Because as far as I'm concerned, that guy has 3 days. Right? But I found myself, spinning out. Because I was out of town when it happened. And I got back to town. One of the first things I want to do is go drive by the guy's house. There's just this dad protective, you want to keep your kids from pain kind of thing, right? And you just have this moment where you realize, man, at some point, your heart just breaks for somebody like that. Because you realize that they're not just doing it here, they're doing it everywhere. There's a person that's lost the plot. There's a person that's they think the beach is all that there is. They think the sandcastle is all that there is. And so when someone dents their sandcastle, their life is ruined, right? Think about this. I just want to breathe some fresh life into you. Think about the beauty of this world that we live in. Would you just think for a moment about the things that we get to create? The stuff we get to create. Think about the projects you get to do with other people. And think about the relationships you do get to nurture. Think about the things you get to solve in your life. It all changes when you realize 25,550. That's all I got. And when you realize that, you go, man, maybe I shouldn't look at work the way I do. Maybe I shouldn't look at my house the way I do. Maybe I shouldn't look at my relationships the way. Maybe I should change some of the way I interact with people around me. And I know some of you, you hear the number and you're like, you already did the math because you have an iPhone. And so you got off of Instagram for a minute, right? And you did the math and you got 7,000. And I know there's this part of you that panics. And so there's two responses we have to the panic of realizing our days are numbered. One is we just go fully into the house of pleasure that the writer of Ecclesiastes is talking about, right? We just go into feasting. I'm just going to eat. I'm just going to drink. I'm just going to do all these things. And I just want to suck it all in for myself. I just got to go because all I know is the sand. I don't know there's anything else. And so you dive into this. Or the other option is you numb yourself from that reality. And so in the same way, you just listen to the Song of Fools. It's I don't want to know. I don't want to think about it. Which is why the gospel is important and why the gospel of Jesus is so beautiful. And the gospel of Jesus, on so many different levels, it changes us. And sometimes we just think in one dimension as it relates to the cross of Christ. But think about this for a moment. That the God of the universe, who lives outside of space and time, enters into this 25,550-day reality and experiences everything that you and I will ever experience, including the day that the tide comes in and the tide goes out, experiences death before our eyes on a cross, and then the resurrection. As he is raised from the dead, it sends this tremendous announcement to all of us living with a number of days that the number of days we have is not all that there is. When we look at the number of days we have with a sense of realizing that there is more beyond this, it changes how we play in the sand. Are you with me? So the gospel, the greatest gift of the gospel is this reminder that this is not all that there is. That this, you playing on the sand, this is not all that you've got. And something changes. Yes, it's temporary. It still has meaning, but maybe not the kind that you thought it did. So the gospel transforms us from a place of either just consumption and panic or a place of numbing and ignoring to a place where now we just sort of engage meaningfully with the people that are around us. That's what the gospel does to us. It says, I can actually engage this world in a different kind of way because of this thing that I know is true. It changes us. It changes us. There's something, let me just say it this way. There's something about a perspective that is eternal, not infinite, eternal in nature, that will impact how you live in the present. That's what's beautiful about the gospel. And so what you realize is that Jesus isn't morbid. And the writer of Ecclesiastes isn't morbid. He's not saying, hey, go hang out in funeral homes because that's where the good life is. That's not what he's saying. He's saying gain perspective of eternity. Listen to him again. Verse 2. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Take it in. Why? Because in it you will see life. If you love life, and by the way, we already proved we all do, remember how many days you have, because that changes the way you live and the ones you have left. So what are you wound tight about? What's making you anxious? What needs to shift? And where do you need to invite the gospel to penetrate your life in a more meaningful way? Where do you need to say, I need the truth of the resurrection to help me live free with joy and peace and meaning now? Amen? Would you guys stand with me? Next week, we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. If you want to read ahead and be depressed all week, you can do that. Just kidding. And it's going to be really good. And if you want to wait till next Sunday, you can. Well, as you go, as strange as this may sound, may you find yourself in a house of mourning. May you be comfortable with the reality that your days are numbered. And may you, as a result, live this week in the sand. And may you build and play and draw with hope and life and meaning and peace. In the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Love you guys so much. If you want to pray with somebody, there's folks always down front to pray with you. We'll see you guys next Sunday. See you later.